In this era of technology, we have lost something fundamental to storytelling as a medium. The ability to just dump a bunch of teenagers in the woods and reasonably expect that their first response wouldn't be calling the police. Recently, I've been thinking about phones. I'm sure we've all had that moment before when you're going through a story and the answer to a problem seems super simple to you, and then you remember there are no phones in medieval fantasy land. The phone is a versatile tool in storytelling, and one I've been thinking about maybe a little too much lately. See, the present or even the future as a setting has a lot to offer. For a story set in the present, outside your given plot doohickey, you don't really have to go about setting up the finer details of this world. A lot of hidden world stories, those stories where there's a smaller secret world inside our normal modern one a la Harry Potter, will use this to their advantage, being instantly able to contrast the new cool magic world with a baseline the audience is familiar with. And the future is the future. You can do technologically anything so long as you put a big enough year number on it. But the more modern a story is, the more you have to wrestle with the issue of modern technology. It may not seem like it sometimes, but modern technology has solved a lot of problems, many of them communication-based. But in its power comes several headaches for writers, as there's basically no reason in the modern day for your protagonist to not be able to talk to just about anything and everything basically all the time. The thing that got me thinking about this was that thing they do in horror media. You know, no, you can't call anyone for help. Your phone's broken, there's a signal disruptor, Gnome stole it, or maybe you're just plain dumb enough to have gone into your old abandoned workplace without it today. We generally expect the characters we read about to act sort of like we do, so there's an endless line of excuses for why they don't just text somebody. And I decided I wanted to look at a few. How do writers today tackle the phone? And more importantly, what sort of creative workarounds do they use to avoid them? The first that comes to mind for me is the Percy Jackson series. I was a big fan as a kid, not that I owned the books at the time. Percy Jackson was one of my first introductions to the world of fandom, so I got very invested in the lore. An early book mechanic of that world is that Percy and his friends cannot use pretty much any modern technology, because it sends out a signal to monsters letting them know their location. This rule has gone sort of wobbly over the years because at the time it was written, things like personal phones were a lot less common, and now the idea they could avoid technology at all seems extremely unrealistic. This is from what I've seen one of the most popular ways to handle it when fantasy elements exist in your work. Just blame it all on magic. Harry Potter does this too. Magic interferes with modern technology and breaks anything it comes in contact with. Writers often represent magic as a signal or ambient energy, and just pointing at it and saying it interferes with whatever makes technology work is a pretty clean fix. This works best when it doesn't feel cheap. I've read a few fantasy novels that just establish this offhand, and I honestly feel like it's a missed opportunity. There is drama in stripping someone of their ability to communicate with others. Simon Snow is a book series that lets magic and phones coexist without the explosions, but that also restricts phones in a way that makes sense for the narrative. For the record, this book is a Harry Potter parody written in the context of a book about a girl writing a fan fiction about this parody that the author became so attached to she gave it its own book. So it's a novel based on a separate novel's fan fiction of a parody of Harry Potter. The point is the Harry Potter parody thing. I just thought it was interesting. Just assume a Hogwarts-esque setting and you're good. In the first book, the school headmaster is a non-traditionalist who has a bone to pick with the magical government, making sweeping reforms to the school. While they are mostly positive, he also seems to go overboard in some aspects. The ban on phones, for example, feels like a restriction he made specifically to exert his control, making it harder for the families he's targeting with his later actions to communicate and helping him keep a hold of the narrative. This provides an early red flag that something's not quite right with him. When done well, having someone lose their means of communication can be a big deal. If anyone's ever experienced the pang of terror of losing your phone somewhere in public or having it die when you're far from home, there's an emotional punch you can get out of that. Horror media, as you can probably guess, loves this. Even outside the obvious call to police, limiting access to things like medical attention and breaking down communication for people involved can be pretty bad on its own. The Magnus Archives is a personal favorite example here. Their excuse has a lot of crossover with the magic is incompatible with phones thing, but more specifically that even technology understands bad vibes and does not function when exposed to them. We've just gone over this. This means the main character who spends the story getting dropkicked down a flight of stairs into a giant vat of bad vibes pretty much ends up unable to operate anything substantial a few seasons deep as it becomes allergic to him. Or more specifically, the situations he keeps Walking Dead into. Even the premise with how we interact with that world is tied to the idea, as true stories about the supernatural can only be recorded on tape recorders, and the audience is explicitly only able to listen when a recorder is on. It's clever, and it means that when John gets kidnapped for the 6th time in 2 weeks, he doesn't have to keep getting new phones. I imagine that would get expensive. Isolation and loneliness are very prominent themes of this story, and this contributes to that atmosphere. When he comes back from getting chain kidnapped, nobody even knew he had been kidnapped in the first place. It's not like he texts them, and the last time someone was kidnapped, evil worms texted on their behalf anyway, so honestly, it's not a reliable way to tell. If he hadn't come back, how long would it have taken for someone to get worried? And even if they did, how would they know where to find you and how to help you? The police can't trace something that doesn't exist. We're so used to the safety net phones provide that when you're reminded just how dangerous the world can be without them, it hits pretty hard. But sometimes there comes a point when the allure of the phone is too strong and they call you back to them. There are a number of ways to cheat this when you realize maybe some long-distance communication is a good idea. Magic FaceTime is a weirdly popular one. Percy Jackson does it with iris messaging. The magic mirror is a common idea that both Castlevania and Star vs. the Forces of Evil use. It's an easy way to make a character more intimidating than if you just, texted them. These sorts of workarounds typically come with limitations. The dang thing's too big for use when you're running around battling. Maybe it's crackly and has an unreliable signal. Maybe it's just a bad phone. Gachi Yakuta uses communication chokers that are disrupted routinely when characters have to go underground, which makes staging fight hazards a lot more interesting. This acts as a bit of a cheat for worlds that you'd want not to have real technology in them, but would still like to be able to keep the action going relatively quickly. If characters had to send letters before they did everything, either we'd have mail so fast it might as well be an email anyway, or the action would have to slow down for potentially weeks at a time. One Piece exists in a strange middle ground, because while phone calls via snail are distinctly possible, it's not like Luffy calls up everyone he knows when something cool happens. You get the sense that when something does occur, it's still the papers and posters that control the narrative. Your average citizen does not own a telepathic snail. The snails get used to make long-distance calls to pirates or across marine bases, but not for much else. I mean, asterisk, I haven't seen all of One Piece, but I assume not for much else. It keeps the world feeling vast, something that can get a bit lost when it feels like the characters can always reach every part of it without much effort. An extension of the concept is the just slightly past setting. Ever seen a movie or a book inexplicably set in the 80s or 90s for no other reason than making the cell phones bigger and bringing back boom boxes? Many settings will turn back the clock just enough to be recognizable and relatable to the modern viewer, but also have the advantage of landlines being the only reliable phone service. Hell, if you go back far enough like Full Metal Alchemist, your characters have to physically travel to use a phone, an appealing option for tragedy if you know what I mean. The future is a little harder to excuse. Considering most media set in some theoretical future is usually built around some new technology, because why else are we in the future right now, pulling a good excuse is way harder. I remember watching one of the My Hero Academia movies a few years back and noticing just how much they had to justify themselves for the premise of this situation to even exist. The thing they wanted to do was just have the show's primary class of students fight some villains by themselves. But there's a lot of problems to getting there. Number one is that they would have had the villains taken off their hands almost immediately if they were in their normal setting. Being in the future, My Hero Academia uses this wobbly technology to justify a lot of things, mainly in hero work, and it can be assumed a lot of the technological development has been catered to them. Plus, it's like professional wrestling with real murder. If you think a news crew wouldn't be all over that in seconds, you've clearly never been online. The decision the movie ultimately makes is to move the entire class to an island with absolutely no heroes and no supervision to do hero training work outside the main city. And then, of course, the villains explode the phone lines. While it definitely does impart the idea of them being totally isolated and the only option to save these people, it's also definitely a little bit funny how much they had to go out of their way to cover all their bases. They had to put these kids on an island. They spend most of the first half of this movie imparting just how alone they are, guys, and how much they rely on this shoddy landline system, guys. But also I understand why they had to do it. As people familiar with the mechanics of this world, we would have had more questions if they didn't. It wasn't a bad decision, but it did make me think about how they have to manage this in a world where technology is so advanced. But aside from worlds where the technology is separate to the main idea, If the writer of a story in the future is trying to make a statement about the possible downsides of technology, be it we're taking things too far with technology or ethical questions or something like that, they may take down technology as a route by having the bad guys, or the government, or the sentient robots, or the aliens, or the, well, you get it, monitoring and tracing the phones, turning their technology against them. I think it's ultimately one of the hardest to make excuses for, especially if your setting is in the not-so-distant future. By placing your story in the future, the audience sort of automatically assumes many of the problems they have with their own technology would have just been solved by then. So saying something like the Wi-Fi is slow or there's no signal in the area feels less like a plausible thing that could happen and more like your awesome future isn't so awesome after all if we haven't managed to make a router better. I've also seen the concept of a dead zone be used by futuristic stories that need to kill communications. The bad guys have set up an area where nothing works, or you're stranded on an alien planet, or something like that. These can be very good for stranding stories, where your characters have to solve a problem their awesome tech would blow through in a few seconds if the dang things were working. You'd either have to escape back to the doohickey or disable the dead zone and come back with a vengeance. This is also something I see a lot in one-off fights where they want a character in a one-on-one that they would normally call backup for. It's pretty great for a good, "you're all alone, hero" villain speech, should you need one. Information and how it's controlled is one of the foundations of storytelling as a whole. Your villains need to keep their secrets from the heroes, your heroes need to keep their tragic backstories from each other until an opportune dramatic reveal, and your audience has to believe that all of this is really happening, or you've lost them completely. It's not that the phone itself is something you should be afraid of in your stories. For a lot of people, it's a daily reality of life, and it doesn't have to be quarantined away from your plot to keep everything running smoothly. Actually, the most clumsy stories can be the ones that overindulge in explanations about why the way their characters chose to do things was the only way. I promise, for real, guys! Because that absolutely breaks suspension of disbelief more than trying to claim that nobody thought to call anyone for help while being chased by a crazed murderer in the woods. It is my firm belief that almost any concept can be pulled off if a writer is just clever or ridiculous enough to go through with it. It's why we don't blink when One Piece looks us dead in the eyes and tells us all of its telephones are telepathic snails. A story should do what best caters to its needs, but as we can see by how many writers tend to avoid them, instant communication tools can be both very powerful and very difficult to handle. So if you are writing a story that you hope will run for a long time, consider your tools very carefully. Because once something like that is added to your story, it is in your audience's mind forever, and they will bring it up at every single plot hole. So either line up some good loopholes, or be ready for it. That's all for me today. Sort of a strange video for this channel, I know, but the topic grabbed a hold of my mind a few weeks ago and I wanted to share. If you got any examples I've missed, please tell me about them in the comments and like and subscribe on your way out. Thanks for watching, and good night.